Okay, so for you guys on YouTube, welcome. We're here at the MeterX daily meeting. We've got a special guest today, Dr. John Jaquish, who is the inventor of both OsteoStrong and the X3 bar. He has a new book out. We're going to talk about that. I want to just first thank John. John has been a supporter of what I've done as within the carnivore diet. John practices a carnivore diet himself. John has been generous and has helped donate to our clinical trial, which we think is critically important to bring this wonderful, powerful nutrition weapon to the mainstream. My goal, like I said before, I'd love every doctor in the United States and throughout the world to, be empowered to utilize this for certain conditions. I think it's just a wonderful tool. John, I just want to start out right out of the gate. You wrote a book called Weightlifting is a Waste of Time.
That's right.
As someone who has been weightlifting for 40 years, and I've got that book down here as well. I'm 90%. Right. As someone who's been weightlifting for 40 years, I look at that and I'm saying, what the hell is this guy talking about? That's pretty controversial. It's pretty crazy. As you read the book, you can see that it's an interesting title. You don't mean resistance training is a waste of time, but
that's right. That's a good distinction.
Right. And so. And again, I just did an X3 workout a few minutes ago. I mean, 15 minutes ago, and I'm like, I think I talked to you the other day. So I'm going to do it strictly only X3 for the next six weeks. No other lifting, no other training other than I'm going to do some walking. Just gotta walk my dogs.
No weightlifting, just X3.
Just X3. Going to do it for 6 weeks, and we'll see what does. And of course, I'm going to continue eating a carnivore diet. I will tell you that, and I've said this before. It is a hell of a hard workout if you do it the right way. I mean, I'd love to see heart rate data. I don't know if you have any of that, because I mean, I literally get in there. I did a set of front squats, one set to basically failure. My heart rate was, I know, at least 180. I put my finger in my pulse and it was just thumping. It was just thumping away. And the total work. I did 3 sets. I did some bent over rows, some curls, and some front squats. I mean, each set took me under a minute. I rested 3-4 minutes between sets, and I'm done. I mean, I'm done my whole workout for the day in 10 minutes. And so, the skeptic in me is going to say, well, is that enough? Have I done enough? But before we get into that, John, welcome. Give us a little bit of background on you. I know I didn't do you justice by just with kind of glossing over your accomplishments, but can you just kind of give us a little background and then we can get into the book and whatever else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I got started in life sciences when I developed the medical devices that are found in OsteoStrong clinics. And that was to treat, well, first, it wasn't for the clinics, it was to treat my mother's osteoporosis. And once I really discovered how easy it is to trigger bone growth, then it was based on axial loading. So this is the axis of a bone. And if we can take the bone on end to end and compress it, then we can trigger that bone to grow in density and become more powerful. So after developing that device, I looked at some of the forces that people were putting through their bone mass, and it was incredible. Like, we had deconditioned elderly women putting 6 or 7 or 8 times their body weight through their hip joints. Whereas, I mean, these are forces that are higher than the strongest people in the world would use. And so now they were just using these forces in a very small range of motion. Impact ready range is what I called it. So if you trip and fall, that's how you brace yourself. So, and coincidentally, gymnasts, they can absorb 10 times their body weight in a landing. Nobody can squat 10 times their body weight. So I realized if the body is capable of this, when we fatigue a muscle, we're fatiguing it in the weak range of motion by definition. That's why we call it that. And that is really capitalizing or maximizing the inefficiency in the stimulus. So what happens if, as I was developing this device, I was collecting data, and I realized that I was the only one with data showing that the stronger range is 7 times more powerful than the weaker range. So people had talked about it before. Like when you do a push-up, when you're in the down position, it's very hard. And then when you're pushed up, it's much easier. And it's because you have a 7 times greater output when your arms are almost fully extended. Not fully extended, but almost fully extended. So when coming to that realization, I thought, wow, like I have information here that kind of shows that weightlifting sucks. And then I said, well, I don't really want to say that. But then as I started thinking, yeah, I could develop a product around this that would be incredibly powerful. We need a weight that changes. So I knew people had some success with band training before, but mostly therapists, because the problem with a band is your wrist, like when you grab it to do like a push-up, your wrists are twisting to the outside, which is just like, as soon as you start twisting your wrist, you have neural inhibition. Basically, it's your body's way of shutting you off because you're hurting yourself. So that wasn't a way to go. But what I did was I developed an Olympic bar and a second ground to stand on, so that you weren't twisting your wrists or your ankles, and you could use incredible forces. So when I now do a chest press, I'm holding 540 pounds at the top and about 100 pounds at the bottom. And the weight changes as I move, and I can go to a much deeper level of fatigue. So after building this device, then I debuted this to the world 3 years ago, and had incredible success with kind of the biohacker community, people who are just looking for a more efficient way, so they're willing to read something. The fitness and bodybuilding community, that was just that wasn't a great community for something scientific. And then as the company is growing, I realized a lot more people are understanding that we have variable capacity in our bodies, and so we should match that capacity with a variable resistance. But the variance has to be right. It has to come close to matching what our biomechanics are capable of. So the whole thing became very complicated when looking at all the documentation. But when you look at all the documentation in the order in which I had discovered it and put it all together, starting with my research and then moving from there, it just made perfect sense. Like, hence I called the book Weightlifting is a Waste of Time. It's not that weightlifting doesn't work for anyone, but, and I put this also in the book, ask yourself the question, who really succeeds at weightlifting? Now we got a study that shows that 27% of people who exercise, this was done in one trial, were unable to ever trigger muscle protein synthesis. There were, if you look at the top, like a lot of studies on weightlifting use people who are already somewhat athletic, so they're already getting some growth and gains out of it. But it was like a 27.5 were unable to trigger any muscle protein synthesis whatsoever. And then there's another study which was actually done by a financial firm, but they use the NANES database. And the NANES database is the largest collection of kind of physical health metrics that has ever been collected. And they add 2,000 people per year to the NANES database. And what we see in that data is that of males, they had more information on males with percentage body fat. Of males, the top 1% of males are 10.9% body fat. Top 1%. That's not even really that impressive. That's like okay. I would prefer most people be in single digit body fat. So the top 1% is just like sort of fit looking. What does that tell you about what the fitness industry has done? Fitness is the most failed human endeavor. Like, nutrition is a huge part of that, of course, but most people are weaker than they should be, and they're not succeeding at fitness. So when someone wants to defend orthodox fitness practice, I'm like, it's like defending a financial firm that loses 99% of its money. It's a total failure. Like, and the people, coincidentally, the people who don't work out, why don't they work out? It might be because they see a lot of people going to the gym and not getting anything out of it and looking the same year after year after year. And Sean, you and I definitely, we want everyone to be fit, not just highly athletic people. And when I thought about the title, I thought about the opposite of the title, which was your first podcast, Human Performance Outliers. When you see somebody who looks really strong, they're kind of an outlier. Like that's not normal, but it should be, and it can be. And another thing I want to point out to everyone, and this is a huge message in the book, is what are the biggest differences? Like, I'm sure everybody who's lifted weights has had this experience where you went to high school with somebody and you started lifting weights when they did, and they put on like 30 pounds of muscle in 6 months or a year or something like that, and you put on like 2 or 5. And there's 2 big genetic factors that contribute to strength. One is birth weight. So if you're born premature, you're going to be a smaller person, but that also means the chances of being smaller in stature and having smaller joints and having smaller everything, or lighter, not fully developing bone structure. That tends to be the case. And so that's a huge contributing factor. So that's not just muscle, that's just physical size. But the other thing is tendon insertion. So if you have a tendon insertion that's closer to the origin, you have less leverage. If it's further away from the origin, you have more leverage. And this is very interesting because this explains, I believe, the other study that I was referencing in the beginning of this podcast, where I'm talking about people who are unable to trigger any muscle protein synthesis at all. What the tendon insertion argument means is when you're back here, you hardly have any access to the musculature at all. So very small. Whereas some other people who, like, let's say my pectoral tendon probably inserts right, near the beginning of my bicep, close to my shoulder. But if it were to be down further on my humerus bone, then I would have more leverage on the pectoral and be able to engage it more through all ranges of motion. And I think this is one of the biggest things, and the studies did conclude this, that this is one of the biggest driving factors of who really becomes a strength athlete and who might not, or who might have a harder time becoming a strength athlete. But with variable resistance, especially in the right proportion, it's irrelevant. Because we're not trying to load the weaker range of motion. We're trying to hyperload the stronger range of motion, which is going to be the same because the leverage is out of the equation at that point. And then we adjust back from there. And then when we go to fatigue, we go to fatigue in diminishing range. So my first repetitions are going to be almost at full range because you don't want to go to lockout. And then the later repetitions in the set are like half reps. But it's okay because the weight drops off in those half repetitions. So it doesn't matter if you don't have full access to as much musculature as some other people do in the mid-range and in the weak range, because the weight drops off and you're firing as much as you can fire and completely fatiguing the muscle. So that was the premise of the book.
John, the biggest point that you made, and it's something that, when you drop back and you look at the big perspective, and I've been immersed in fitness and athleticism my whole life. For me, it's not even it's a non-starter to think that I'm not going to be part of that. But to say that, look, fitness as an industry, almost like healthcare as an industry, has been an abysmal failure, because look at the general population. Right. Not only is not the general population in the 10% body fat range for males, and obviously that's going to depend on how you're measuring DEXA versus skinful, but whatever. I mean, the general population is not even healthy. I mean, and to say that, and even to start to approach that any of them are fit. So you are absolutely correct in saying that whoever job it is to get these unhealthy people fit and athletic and muscular has failed miserably, because, there's all kinds of gyms. We've spent more on gyms. There are more gyms and more access in the last 2 or 3 decades than there ever has been. I mean, there's gyms on every street corner, and we still see the majority of the people that aren't fit. And so, yes, maybe there is some sort of paradigm shifting thing that needs to be done. Just like nutrition, I'm in here beating the drum about, hey man, plant-based ain't the way to go. We've already done the plant-based thing. That's what most of our diet is. And it's not actually working that well. And we've been going after fat and cholesterol, and arguably that's not going well. So I think that's a really good way to look at it from perspective wise and saying, yeah, fitness has failed. Let's try something different. Obviously, I don't think resistance training is a bad thing. I'm a big fan of that. We know that it clearly, those people that engage in it, those people that, do maintain and build muscle undoubtedly are healthier than those that do not. I think that's a fairly easy argument to make. My question, so I certainly, and I know this is kind of a complicated concept for a lot of people that don't understand about the different ranges of motion and where you're strongest, particularly people that have never really engaged in weightlifting. I know, and to your point, when I was deadlifting at my peak, around 2000, when I was pulling almost 800 pounds deadlifting, I was using bands. I mean, I was, of course I was strapping them, like all kind of West Side barbell bands and chains and Louis Simmons and weightlifters
they're like
known
pioneers.
Right.
They
know
never
the
calculated what
right.
I did.
Right. But I mean, it works. It clearly works. And, the question is, great, you can strap it to a platform on a deadlift, but then what do you want to do when you bench press? What do you want to do when you want to do squat? I mean, it becomes progressively more problematic to make that setup work. And I can see where I can throw this X3 in my suitcase. And that's what I do. I mean, and I've got plenty of load. And the other question is, if you don't have 300 or 400 or 500 pounds of weights laying around, where do you get the load from? And the thing I appreciate is I can load that.
I mean, it's right here. I'm holding.
Right. I can throw that.
Very simple and elegant.
I can throw that orange bar on there, and now I've got 600-700 pounds that I can play with, which is really, really cool. My question for you is, and if somebody has a question about what he's talking about, some of the other stuff, is volume, because I'm not like, the program you have is do the one set to failure and you're good, and then do it again 48 hours later. How did you determine that? Rather than saying I'm going to do 3 sets or I'm going to do it every 4 days, where did that sort of science come from?
Because my research started with bone, of the appropriate level of loading past the minimum dose response, like in the hip, you need 4 multiples of body weight minimum to do anything to the hip joint for bone density. So like, people who go out for a walk for osteoporosis, they're not doing anything. Not to the bone. I mean, walks are fine, but you're not improving your bone density. So, when I looked at what it took to stimulate a change, we see bone marker changes, and the blood test, P1NP blood test is the best one. But if you go through an osteogenic loading moment, you do an OsteoStrong session, for example, within 1 minute, you test the blood and you see the markers have completely changed. The catabolic measures are all down and the anabolic measures are all up. One stimulus. And the stimulus is really only seconds. And so then I found some research that talked about one loading cycle is all that's required to trigger osteogenesis. So then, okay, well, it's an example of an adaptive response that just needs the proper fatiguing stimulus of the target tissue. And one experience is enough, and multiple experiences don't do any more. In fact, could just create inroads into recovery, just could create damage to the tissue. So OsteoStrong was a one stimulus and done, just like what was seen in the gymnastics and explosive landing research. So then I looked at other adaptive responses, like if you wanted, I mean, not that anybody really goes for this sort of thing anymore, but if you want a suntan, how many sets do you do in the sun? Right? You go out and you get one sun exposure, and that's it. You're done. So when we look at weightlifting, I came to the conclusion that the reason that people do multiple sets with weightlifting is because the stimulus is very poor, because there's so much inefficiency in human biomechanics lifting the same weight. And in fact, functionally, have you ever watched movers, like guys who pick up heavy furniture for a living? They never use the weak range because
Yeah, I
you
used to be a
never
mover.
look.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they're like absolutely. It's almost like a different type of athleticism when you watch these guys. They only use the strong range, and they're moving pianos and couches with beds in them and all kinds of crazy heavy stuff. And they're not big strong guys either. Not necessarily. I'm sure some of them are, but it's they're trying to maximize efficiency, not tell people how much they bench press. So it's like it's a different kind of thing what they're trying to do. And so I just, after looking at all that, I thought, I don't think you need more than one set of this. And then we did trial and error. We had one group of people in the office do one set, and we had one group do two sets, and the two sets did no better. Like, everybody grew. The two set guys were a little bit sore. The one set guys weren't sore at all. So I was like, all right, then I guess it's just like bone. Like, when you truly exhaust a muscle. Also, I feel like when your subconscious knows you have one more set to do, you kind of half-ass your first set because you got to have gas in the tank to do another one. When you know it's all out and you're done and you just have to give that maximum exposure force, well, then that's what you do. And I think you trigger more.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I know if you're only doing one set, like I said, it is very much a, if you're doing three sets of something, you're going to kind of sandbag a little bit on the first two, and it's for many
does.
people. I mean, that's all kind of, even the highest level athletes do that. I know it's, there's, I know Tim Noakes, I don't know if you're familiar with Tim, he talks about the central governor theory where, these world-class athletes can always find a little bit more coming down the stretch, because their brain, whether it's conscious or unconscious, their brain holds them back a little bit. And then when they know they're going to be done, they let everything loose, and that's how they break world records and stuff. But yeah, that's, Brett's in the comments said, I've never consciously sandbagged sets 1 and 2. I don't know about that. I have. I know I have, and it's kind of interesting. So let's talk a little bit about, so you've talked about one set's enough, and then, because there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of back and forth of what's the frequency of the dosage. Some people say, well, once a week. If you look at the HIIT guys, they're like once a week, one set to failure. The Mike Mentzer, Arthur Jones type crowd. And your program is, I think it's every 48 hours, 6 days a week, 1 day off basically is what I remember.
Yeah. And that's really based on a muscle biopsy study, that's about as good as you can get with understanding how muscle recovers. So they had someone do a weight training session, actually a group of people, and they would cut small chunks of the muscle out of them and watch where the progress of the building of muscle would go. So, like what was it? Like in 24 hours, what did the muscle look like? In 36 hours, what would the muscle look like? In 48 hours, what would the muscle look like? And what they determined was after 36 hours, muscle protein synthesis is done. So I thought, well, wow, that's great. I think a lot of people get exhausted because they do a lot of sets and they think hitting a muscle group once a week is like the right thing to do. We can hit every muscle 3 times a week, but only with one set. And so that was how that determination was made. But, Mentzer and Arthur Jones, by the way, just for the people who don't know who Arthur Jones is, the founder of Nautilus, the guy who designed all the Nautilus equipment. And he experimented a little bit with variable resistance, but with a cam, basically a pulley that was in the shape of a Nautilus shell, but hence that's where they got the name. And it was pretty cool, but they didn't get it right. The ratios from weaker to stronger range, they were like X at the bottom and 1.2X at the top, or it really should have been X at the bottom and something like 5X at the top. But they, yeah, they just didn't have the benefit of that muscle biopsy study, and we do now.
Is there any benefit? Because, I could see somebody saying, well, I'm just going to go and do rack pulls. I mean, because I can load up, and I've done, I've thrown 1,000 pounds on a bar, and done rack pulls with it before when I was, deadlifting heavy. And so,
Sure.
but, and that, again, you got to load 1,000 pounds on the bar, to do that. But I mean, when I'm just doing the rack pull, I'm not, I guess the question is, because you've got that weaker range of motion, and, primarily we're working the stronger range of motion most of the way, but then we have this diminishing returns. And so
Right.
is there any benefit of moving through that weaker range of motion? Does that provide some level of benefit versus doing most of it
Yeah.
in the strong
Yes.
range?
The rack pull, you're really only getting myofibril growth, but there's two types of muscle growth. There's sarcoplasmic and myofibril, and you want to exhaust the ATP, the glycogen, and the creatine phosphate, the fuels in the cell, in the individual muscle cells, so that the body wants to store more ATP, glycogen, and creatine phosphate. So full range is great when you want to do that. And then you get a third element of growth by keeping constant tension through that full range of motion, because by keeping constant tension and not locking the joint, you're almost doing the same thing in a more efficient way, actually, as like blood flow restriction training, because blood's coming into the muscle just a little bit and nothing's leaving when you keep constant tension. So you create a hypoxic effect. And when you have muscle hypoxia, then you downregulate myostatin, because for a brief period of time, it seems to be a cardiac axis. This is a little bit of a theory, but there's quite a few studies that support this. The heart sees that some muscle is missing from your body when you keep constant tension. Therefore, myostatin goes down, and myostatin is basically the protein in the body that stops you from growing more muscle. Because if you could just keep growing and growing muscle, it would be too much for your heart to handle, and it could kill you. So it's a safety mechanism. But if we can downregulate it for a little bit, we can get some more muscle growth. So we're combining hypoxia and sarcoplasmic fatigue and myofibril fatigue in one experience. And so getting all three of those elements is critical with the X3 set, whereas like a rack pull would really only be like 1/3 of that. You'd only get myofibril fatigue.
Thanks for that. There's I want to comment in the background. Travis on the screen. I don't know if he's not on your screen, but he's in there doing the X3 demo. You might scroll.
Oh, I can see Travis.
Yeah, he's in there doing stuff, and he's sweating his butt off. Just like I did. It is pretty interesting, because like I said, I did 3 minutes, and my heart rate was, 180, maybe more, and I was sweating. Just in 3 minutes. And so I mean, and I think this is something that hopefully he's doing front squats, and he's doing calf raises. What I would, I think it's very important to emphasize. Can you talk, John, how to do a set on the X3? Because, I think like anything, if you don't do it correctly, if you don't do it like it's intended, you're not going to get the benefits. And that's something I said, if you do it as prescribed. So will you walk us through maybe a set and talk what's going on as you progress through the reps?
Yes. So there's 8 movements, but I'll use the chest press just as an example. So if I start doing the chest press, of course, there's whatever band is appropriate is hooked on here, and it goes around my back. Now, the movements from the floor have a second ground you stand on, which is a heavy metal plate where the bands can run freely underneath your feet, but it does not twist your ankles. So the objective behind the X3 is protecting the small joints of the body, which are very prone to injury, wrists and ankles. Once those are protected, like we interface with flat surfaces really well, and we interface with bars really well. We don't interface with dumbbells very well because they can twist joints. Hence, dumbbells, you can't handle nearly the amount of weight with dumbbells, which is why the strongest people in the world never use dumbbells.
Hey John,
Uh,
before you, I want to make that point because when we hear a lot of guys doing like martial arts and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and there's always wrists and ankle locks, and that's for the same thing. You have this incredibly powerful feedback when those things get twisted out of position, and your body just shuts it down.
oh
It's like
yeah.
stop, and that's why these guys tap out. So I totally, you can see where you can make that argument where. And that's something I didn't realize until I read your book, was talking about that, when you do the bands just in your hands, you do get that twisting motion, which greatly limits your ability to produce
Right.
force.
Neural inhibition, like that's what that's called in neurology. When something is uncomfortable, your body starts shutting muscles off to stop you from doing it. So like the idea that like when guys lift, they're gonna just like power through the pain, nah, they're just hurting themselves. And it's just kind of a moron's mentality, but your body just can't do it. You shut off. So back to what I was saying. So when I go to push away, when I use the orange band for the chest press. When I go to push away, I'm just holding 100 pounds back here. And as I move away, it gets to about 300 pounds in the middle. And when I get closer to the top, not lockout, but here, now I'm holding 540 pounds. And this is based on my height. And there's an app that tells you how much you're lifting. And so it goes back to 100, then 300, then 540, and so on until I get to about, and this is just me right now, until I get to about 23, 24 repetitions. And then I can't get to the top anymore. So then I shorten my repetitions. So I might do 4 more in the middle. And then I can't do that because I've fatigued that part of the muscle with that weaker range of motion. Now I'm just at the weakest, and I get maybe 2 more repetitions that are just 1 inch. And I never lock at the top, and I never rest at the bottom to maximize that hypoxic effect I was talking about. And you'll see growth if you're like a lean person. You'll see growth pretty much every workout. Every time muscle looks a little bit different, a little more defined, a little bit bigger. And if you're not lean, it's happening. You just can't see it. But you'll get there. And the movements are slow and controlled, about 2 seconds up, 2 seconds down. Travis is actually doing his deadlift perfectly right now. I don't want to distract him, so we'll stop talking about him. Nope, don't look at the camera, Travis. Yeah, you never want to turn your head when you do a deadlift. So that's really the entire experience. And each workout is 4 sets. It takes most people about 10 minutes. When you're a really strong person, though, and I want to dispel, this is a falsehood to fitness right here. The idea that strength athletes have poor cardiovascular endurance. No, strength athletes have larger muscle. And when those larger muscles contract, there's a greater demand for blood. Like when a Formula One engine is going around the track versus a Honda Civic engine, the Formula One engine is not built for efficiency. It's sucking a lot of fuel. So, that's just the way that works. And so like sometimes I'll run up a couple flights of stairs with a fraternity brother of mine who does triathlons. And he says, man, your cardiovascular endurance is terrible. And I'm like, no, you're just a skinny guy. And, he weighs like 150 pounds and I weigh 240. So like my quads are maybe 3 times the size of his. So there's a blood demand in my quadriceps as I'm running up flights of stairs. It's just a bigger engine and it's sucking more blood up, just like that Formula One engine. So it's for me, the reason I bring this up is it takes me about 15 minutes to get through my workouts because I really have to catch my breath between the sets because I'm like devastated. Like after a set of squats, even the one-legged squats, I'm like on my hands and knees on the ground, just trying to catch my breath. And it takes like a good 2 minutes before my breath comes back to normal. But of course, the effect is so powerful.
Yeah, and that's like I said, I always do the squats or the deadlifts last because I know you're wiped after those. So I mean, it's kind of like that's how
Oh yeah.
that's why I do
Yep.
that. You know, it's kind of a very interesting thing. So the book, why weightlifting is a waste of time, or weightlifting is a waste of time rather. You get into a little bit of some other things as well. I mean, you talk about nutrition,
Yeah,
so
about a third of the book is nutrition because,
yeah,
and I told you this yesterday when we were just chatting. The once so after I built the product, I'm like, I have to recommend the best diet with this because I know that most people just don't get enough of what they need to grow. And I thought, I've read different things about how much protein you need, and I was already ketogenic because that made sense. I read the science on that 13 years ago. I've been ketogenic for 13 years. And then when I started reading about like Jose Antonio's research, and I really like his approach. He really didn't have any preconceived ideas when he started his research. Whereas one of the problems, researchers have a lot of ideas about the way things work, and then they go out to prove that that's the way things work, and that's called like that's a research bias, or what do you call it, like confirmation bias. Like, you want to know that your idea is right, so you go out to prove that your idea is right, so you engineer a test to show that your idea is right, but really your idea is wrong. Like, that's like vegan research. So the Jose Antonio really approaches, he's a professor at Florida State. He really had this idea where he just didn't care what the limit was. So he tested very high levels of protein, and it really showed that 1 gram per pound of body weight in high quality protein is like the minimum that you need. And then I really like the fasting research that I had been reading. And, I realized fasting is not a fad. It puts your body in a lot of different modes that it's not going to get to otherwise. So I really wanted to be eating 1 meal a day. And then I looked at how much protein I needed, and I'm like, wow, if this is what the body needs, there is no room in the intestines for all the other stuff. And so I came to this conclusion, like, it was just like a couple months before I saw you on Joe Rogan. And it was like, wow, like I'm not the only one who's seeing this. And so I really, like, right out of the gate, I was pushing really heavy carnivore nutrition. And it was so happy that you were there and saying the same kind of thing. And then others kind of came around too. I had mentioned this to Dave Asprey because I did the product launch on his podcast. And Dave is almost like, he's not really an exercise advocate. He's almost like exercise avoidance, or like how to make it so easy that you don't even know you're doing it, which is kind of Dave's goal, which, hey, I mean, if that can trick more people into being more fit, then great. But ultimately, he didn't really appreciate the exercise aspects or the muscle growth aspects. It was more like brain health. And he also had these ideas that we really needed all these antioxidants. And then I know I really got him when I'm like, you don't need antioxidants if you're not oxidizing. Just like, well, I mean, yeah. But that kind of made me, have him say, okay, yeah, there's his way of nutrition, and then maybe there's another way where you just eat meat. And then one of his other arguments was his eyes would dry out. And I'm like, well, maybe you're eating too lean a cut of meat, because like your skin, most dermal functions are kind of fat based. But I mean, I don't know, like tear ducts, that there's a lot of things that could be. So nobody could really tell me why an all meat diet was wrong. And in fact, In the book, I set out after telling everybody basically all you should be eating is meat, and you should space meals apart as far as you can, without making your life, unbearable. And you're going to do so incredible with having low body fat and having high levels of strength. Here's another thing I detail in the book. There was a study on fasting, and actually my co-author, this guy Henry Alkire, is the most patient person I probably ever met in my life, which is why I asked him to do this instead of having me do this. I said, I want you to go through all of the fasting research and find out if one of these groups, and I said, this is not going to be in the abstract. This is going to be like in the discussion section, because none of these studies are looking for this. It'll just be like oh, and by the way, we noticed this also. See if the people who did time-restricted eating had any sort of excessive anabolic effect or had unexplained muscle growth. And he's like, man, that's a really specific thing you want me to look for. And there's not a lot of fasting research. And I'm like, hey, just humor me. 6 hours later, he calls me. He says, I found exactly what you described in a study. And there's a study where people ate every 48 hours. And then the other people, the control group, just ate normally, Western diet kind of thing. And the fasted people, the people who weren't fasting, they weren't eating carnivore. They were eating, just sort of Western diet also. But what the study noticed was that the people that ate every 48 hours were growing muscle, and the other people, they had shrinking muscle. They were losing muscle mass. So there is some kind of anabolic rebound. And I describe this in great detail in the book, and explain all the other supporting research that has cited that original research and attempted to explain why. And some very good job. And what we see is like an anabolic rebound from a fast. So it's like you fasted, and then your body's like, okay, we're getting nutrients, so we're going to put these nutrients to work in a better way than we normally would if we were just fed every day. And I found that fascinating also. And, further evidence of why I should only be eating meat, and why I tell people only be eating meat, because now I do one meal every 48 hours, and it's like just a platter of steaks. And then like when I do that, like it's really got to satiate me, because I'm going to go another 48 hours without eating anything. So it's not going to be, I'm not going to have any toast and jam, because that'll just make me miserable. I'll be hungry constantly. I'm going to have like a platter of fillets or sirloins.
Yeah, that's maybe you're familiar with the work of Dr. Jason Fung. I've talked to him before, and he's shown that growth hormone starts to peak 48, 72 hours after fasting. There's some evidence that testosterone may be elevated as well. We see that, and I think the key, in my view, if you're going to work on fasting, I do think resistance training still is very important, because I think you still have to send that anabolic signal, via, mTOR stimulation, which exercise clearly does. And, like I said, people can argue about what the best type of exercises. Just to shift gears a little bit, John, there's several women in the group that have asked questions. Can women do this? Or is it good enough for the women? I've got 5 bands. I use the top 3. The 2 little ones are just too weak for me. I've got a 110-pound girlfriend who uses the lesser ones. So, but what has been your experience with women? Are they going to turn into, Hulk Hogan by doing this, or what's that's always been a misconception of women weightlifting, but do women is this just for men only?
Any female who uses this is going to look like me with a wig on. I'm just kidding. No, it's going to define a feminine body and make it look more feminine. Yeah, no problems at all. I think there's always been a fear, which was kind of nonsensical, but you heard about it a lot maybe 10 years ago. And I think women have realized, oh, lifting weights doesn't make you look like a man. One thing that I have noticed is carbohydrate cravings are more difficult for women to handle than men to handle. I don't know if that's ever been proven in a clinical study, but I know that the women that I know, yeah, they have trouble trying to stay away from certain things, at least more than men. So, what I think ends up happening is there's a start with weight training, and then the appetite goes up, and then instead of eating meat, they're eating Twinkies or cupcakes or something like that. And the whole, like, I get big when I lift weights. No, like, there's a few women that may truly be growing some muscle mass that they may not like at some point, but it's not going to happen overnight or in a year. I do know some women who work certain muscles more than others because they're trying to proportionately develop the body. So they're looking at the body like it's a sculpture. Like, they want more calves, but they don't want more quadriceps. So, yeah, you're not going to be all of a sudden surprised because your legs get too big muscularly. And I don't think we probably have 20% of the customers of X3 are female, and they're all happy with it.
Yeah, there's a couple I comment in here, but what if I'm really, really super small? Like I've literally had my 7-year-old boy doing some of the bands for some of the exercises. And the hardest one for me, I mean, the one I have to use the least resistance, and you can probably guess, is going to be the overhead press, because that, for me, that's a long, long stretch, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, that I have to
You
use
see the NBA players, like,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
we have like
let's
40 NBA players that use it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Some of the users that have adopted this, because we have an NFL Super Bowl champ and several NFL guys doing carnivore now. A lot of professional rugby players doing carnivore. Talk about some of the, and then I want to get back to the really beginner person again. But talk about a little bit who's using, what teams have adopted this, because this is kind of out of the box thinking for a lot of people.
Well, the book was actually endorsed by the Miami Heat strength coach, and they just do X3, and they do it for injury avoidance and for just greater level of strength. And that's what I promised them, and that's what they got, and they're really happy with it. And if you look at their injury statistics, they injure less than anybody. They're a very young team right now, but they're doing spectacular. And then what ended up happening was, names slipping my mind, but it was one of the Miami Heat guys that I hung out with for a little bit, clicked with him, and he ended up going to the Knicks, and he made a bunch of guys on the Knicks get X3, and the strength coach, I'm assuming, was on board, because generally they don't let their guys do anything unless they get it approved by the strength coach. But none of these guys called me, so I had no idea this was going on. And then some of their friends in the NFL got a hold of it, and it was incredible. Like, all of a sudden, all these athletes were inbound calling me, and it's going like, explain how variable resistance works. Like, I read a little bit of the science on the website, but I want more background, and explain it so I can understand it. Don't talk statistics or anything. And it was great for a number of reasons. One is they know that what their bench press is not important. They need to perform better on the field, and they need to stay on the field. So especially the NFL guys, what's the average career in the NFL. I think it's 3 years. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you need to make sure that your tendons, your ligaments are absolutely as strong as possible. You're engaging as much muscular tissue as possible when you move. And of course, every time they get hit, that's going in the other direction. Every time they get a tweak, every time they have lateral pressure to any joint, that can challenge the entire career of an NFL player. So and then with the NBA, it was the height. So really tall guys, they're at much greater joint risk than a shorter guy when they're doing whatever they do athletically, because there's a longer lever arm on every joint. And Sean, you're 100%. You can identify with this. Like when you did the Highland Games, there were a lot of things where you're looking at something that can really hurt you. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's how all the athletes ended up signing on, and I'm really happy that all of these guys ended up not only using X3, trying to understand X3 as best they can. You know, I mean, I'm not going to make anybody memorize a book or anything, but they were all over it, and they all agreed that if I gave them a little bit of help, I could use their photograph on the website. So we have the whole Miami Heat, and then we have 20 other athletes that are on the website. I didn't pay any of those guys. They're just excited about the help that we gave them and the product, and to be sort of part of a movement where strength training is not so risky. Because ultimately, 99.9% of the people, really, it doesn't matter to them what their bench press is or what their squat is. They want to be as strong as possible. They want to be as lean as possible. They want to live a longer, healthier, happier life and look great doing it. And, what you bench is not part of that equation.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're specifically a powerlifter or something like that. So, John,
Right.
let me ask you, I mean, when it's kind of like, I see it a little bit kind of like a carnivore diet. There's people that have tried it, and then there's people that talk about it. And there is a huge dichotomy on somebody who has experience with something.
Right.
So, can someone like order an X3, try it out for a month or so, and then if they're like, this isn't for me, are they able to get it back to you? How does that work? So they can try it out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. 30-day policy. Funny, most consumer product average has a 30% return rate. So, no matter what it is, whether it's shoes or a piece of furniture or whatever, 30% return rate. We have a 1% return rate. And it's usually people who only unwrap the lightest band, and then they realize, and they're pretty open about it. Like they want to return the product. They're like, oh, I didn't realize this was hard. So they thought it was going to be like easy, which, I mean, if it's a worthwhile exercise, nothing's easy.
Yeah, I will go in contrast to Dave Asprey's apparently make it so easy that everybody, gets arguably minimal benefit. It is really, really hard. And I'd say that as someone who has trained my ass off for 40 years and done some really tough stuff. If you do it as advertised and you really push, these are hard exercises. But again, I think that's where the benefit comes. I think just the comment on the nutrition about the antioxidants, we make our own antioxidants. You don't need to be chowing them. I mean, we got glutathione and a bunch of others that we make. So it's kind of like, and the ones we eat through our food, the magic antioxidant super berries, they don't get absorbed very well. So I mean that whole antioxidant thing's kind of a silly.
That's a joke. Harvard's got a great article on how it's just so overhyped.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is the other question. This is a really interesting time because many people have been forced to train at home, and you see the makeshifts. And people are doing push-ups and they're doing chin-ups, and I see some of the bands that people are using, and I look at the bands they're using. It's like, man, you have to have 40 of those bands to make a difference. And so, is it how how can people still get an X-ray from you, while locked in? Because I think a lot of people are coming to the realization that, man, we don't even know when the gyms are going to open up again. Are they going to keep closing down? I really, as someone who's gotten progressively busier, as like I said, we've got this company, I'm the CEO of the company, and now I'm just busier than I've probably ever been. And so I really appreciate being able to knock out, because I'm never going to stop working out. I mean, that's hardwired into my DNA. But I really
it's like brushing
appreciate
your teeth.
right.
You're not going to skip it.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the fact that I can knock this out pretty quickly. I'm really excited to see if I can, get even just equivalent results of what I would get before. I would be very happy for that. But if it's anything beyond that, it's going to be really, really cool. So
I promise you, it will be beyond that.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. So, where can people go to find more information about your book? Where is it for sale? And then also the X3, and then also OsteoStrong, because that's something we didn't touch on more, but it's very important for people. We have a lot of women that listen to this that are at risk for osteoporosis. And so talk about those three things.
I'll start with OsteoStrong. Anybody that has a bone density challenge or osteoarthritis challenge, because there is a thickening of tendons and ligaments, which better supports the joint. Even if you're bone on bone, you can still reduce your pain, which is either a great prehab for an implant, or could help you avoid the implant altogether. I don't know if I should really say that in front of an orthopedic surgeon, but whatever. But some people have put off some surgery for years as a result of getting involved with OsteoStrong. So for more information on that, osteostrong.me is the website to go to. And the scientific research is there, and also some just great experiences from some regular people and now I think we're over treated over 400,000 people, 130 locations in 8 different countries. So it's kind of a clinic type model. And, and look if there's a location near you. If there's not a location near you, you can start one. They're franchises. And they're really fun, and it helps a lot of people, and doesn't feel like a doctor's office. It feels like a happy place where people are getting good news instead of bad news. So it's in the disease care world we live in. Most people don't love going to the doctor's office, but this is just a really, really happy, fun place. And then for the rest of the stuff, I actually put a landing page where you can find sort of everything in one spot. And the website for that is drj.com, doctor written out, the letter J. And then you can find X3 there. You can find some stuff about nutrition. You can find my Instagram and the let's see, somebody's asking Jaquish Biomedical website. My name is John Jaquish, and like a lot of people, they don't know how to spell my last name. So I was sending people to Jaquish Biomedical website. That's why I did drj.com, because people are going to be able to spell that. It's like MeatRx. Like no one's going to screw that up. So drj.com.
That I wonder how many people find you looking for Julius Erving. You remember from the 76?
Oh yeah. Well, I think it was his website, but he's been fishing for the last 15 years, so he didn't care. But cool. Julius Erving. Yeah, great basketball.
Yeah, so the one thing with MeatRx is sometimes it's the autocorrect makes it metrics, type of thing. So anyway,
I didn't think of that.
Well, John, I tell you what, I've got to go do, unfortunately, another meeting. This has been great. I really appreciate you coming on. I just, in the chat, people saying that the members at MeatRx do have a little discount that you've been kind enough to provide for us. So for you guys that want to use the link, you can save a little bit of money on this. Awesome. I look forward to my result. I look forward to continued seeing you succeed and continuing, as a community, let's kind of take back the health and welfare of our community, of our country, and in the world, because we definitely got a big fight ahead of us. And so if we can get people eating right and getting fit, that would be a wonderful thing, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Awesome. I love it.
All right, guys.
Thanks, Sean.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care now. Bye-bye.